one thing that I think everyone has saw, unless you're living under a huge rock, is that there has been many riots in the entirety of the United States, not just in Minneapolis, but also just in the entirety of the United States after after the killing of George Floyd, which sparked these riots to essentially come about, and be in protest against the entirety of the police, and bureaucracy, and we entirely. And then after this spark, it has sparked many protests and even riots as well, all over the entire country, from Los Angeles to New York, Phoenix, Phoenix to Seattle, Seattle to even Maine, and then Maine to even in Florida. So one thing that we can understand here is that these protests, everything been going on, it's not even protests, but just straight up riots. It's essentially on the aftermath of the entire death of George Floyd that sparked everything that just gave about against a state bureaucracy that has oppressed people for many years now. Not even just many years, but since the entirety of the police force has been formed upon this. Since the entirety of the police force has functioned upon this, and this, as socialists, as communists, is definitely good. And if you are even a right winger watching this video, I also highly recommend that you watch this video as well, so that way you can get better insight onto the police history and the police form, and for socialists and communists, how we should organize ourselves upon this you can say revolution has not only happened in the United States now, but also the rest of the entire world, and even then before the many other revolutions but happening beforehand in the end of 2019. One thing that we have to do, and one thing that we have to understand about this as well. So let's get into it. One thing that we have to know about the entirety of the police, why it's functioned as the way it is because it is propped up by the state. The state, that being your Congress, your government, your presidential thing, your oligarch, your quote unquote democracy, your bureaucracy, any form of governance that enacts some sort of authoritative monopoly upon the people is the state. And the state is essentially function as for of a ruling class, or vice versa, or the state becomes the new ruling class entirely, as we can see from Soviet Russia, or not Soviet Russia, the Soviet Union under Stalin after 1932 to be exact. So one thing that we have to understand here is that this is the function of the police. Despite until many definitions of the police that it's supposed to protect people, and it's supposed to enact law and order, it is true that it's supposed to enact law and order, but it's not really protecting people at all. As we can see, more justice systems by the protection for people, and based on to even rehabilitative and justice systems, is more effective by the people themselves in a more of a democratic rehabilitative system involving the entirety of the population without entire of a state measured authority branching upon them, rather by the loose people themselves. And even then, Marx, Engels, Lenin, and even Leon Trotsky, Max Chapman, Tony Cliff, and so many more other Marxists even advocate for this entirely. So, and then this has been proved to be more effective even before Marx and Lenin's times. There were militias, keep in mind, that were not essentially as the militias that we see today under the Second Amendment. Rather, militias that actually carried upon justice systems based upon the community itself. That's essentially the reason why. Yes, these militias were armed with guns, with muskets, of course. This is even back before the United States was built upon. Um, you know, but with muskets, with flintlocks, with swords, and even then, based upon this, like where upon this justice system involving the entirety of the community, what needs to be done, what has to be done, and how we should carry it on is it has been prone to be actually more effective now, effective in our lifetime now, if we were to enact it of today. I'll even give quotes upon, not quotes, but I'll even give sources upon that as well. But even then, we have to understand the state here, the entirety of the state, is essentially already as the function for the sake of a ruling class, and this is always how it's just been. And if you can argue about it, then go right ahead. But I'll even provide onto evidence. The state is essentially funded by some sort of ruling class and some sort of business, so that way you can act onto the policies favoring upon those, such as lobbying groups, business transactions, in some sort of way. And upon this, there's even other groups that essentially seek upon this as well, with some sort of an authority. And with that said state, the state needs to fund some sort of way where it can also protect, so that way it can protect some sort of itself, for the entire system to circulate upon it. And that is where the police comes in. That's where a police or a standing army of a state bureaucracy comes in apart, upon this whole new transactional system, as an act for this entirely. And as this of an act, this is the proof of the case that it is supposed to essentially oppress lower class citizens, or at least stop lower class citizens from revolting, keep order, keep the interests of a ruling class, and have some sort of control over local areas, or even federal or national areas as well. This is where and even then, armies as well, if we're talking about the armies, to also keep order and keep the circulation going onto the international scale as well. This is where it happens entirely, and this is how states have functioned, governmental bodies have functioned, how a bureaucracy, how a state apparatus of a justice and order and law has functioned entirely. Not essentially to keep upon to justice or keep peace or protect people, but is to keep order for the interests of the ruling class, and keep the circulation from happening, and stop people from revolting against the entirety of the government. It's only pretended to essentially protect people because of even opinion, either given by the state or by some sort of ruling class position. And this is the case, and this is what leads to even people coming on to the conclusions that the police entirely saves people, protects people in some sort of way, that it protects them. While the truth is, this is not the case. It is formed this way. There's a reason why the police exist, and not for the sake of protection, for the sake of the class interests, for the sake of a ruling class interest, to be exact, for the sake of stopping a lower class, that being the majority class, revolting against a minority class. This is how it's worked since time began, of slavery, feudalism, and oligarchy, and now capitalism. This is no different than the Knights of the Middle Ages and so many much more. It is very much no different. So by this entirely, sorry about that, but yeah. Well, okay, so one thing that we have to understand here is that, yeah, it doesn't actually serve onto the protection of the people. What it does is just serve onto really of the minority of the ruling class, and and this is on how the system is formed. You can't really reform it. This is where I actually criticize the entirety of at least a little bit a little bit of the Black Lives Matter movement, not the movement itself, to be the George Floyd protests. Sorry, stumbled my words. Um, is that we can't reform the police system. This is how it's worked for forever. This is how it's worked. It is made to oppress minorities. It is made to oppress lower class citizens. It is made to essentially target lower class citizens and minorities of black descent, Asian descent, and Hispanic descent. It is made of this. Why? Because the system made it out to be. This is how it's worked for a while. And even then, there's even people that essentially still defend the system because they are getting a profit out of the circulation, leaving out the working class. This is how it's always been ever since the entire dawn of history, and we're seeing it now more than ever. And so that's at least a little bit of a criticism towards the George Floyd protests. We can't reform the police system. However, what we need to do is essentially abolish it. And even if you're going to see onto the proof enough of this, this is the case. Anyways, now to move on upon as leftists, as a socialist and communist, what needs to be done and how can we do it? One thing that we also need to understand as leftists is that these revolutions, for now, at least what they started out as, was spontaneous. It was spontaneous and it was sparked out of a certain act that launched these protests to even happen. However, this does not mean that parties are not even influencing their right, or they're not actually directly organizing these organizations as well. For example, if we take into like Socialist Party and what Socialist Party has been doing in its branch in Minnesota, they have been organizing a lot of these people and organizing a lot of these protests to even happen in the first place, and even making their own chants saying "Eat the rich" and "Workers Unite." So we do know for a fact that a lot of these protests, especially in Minneapolis, are indeed have a socialist tendency, and that they're even organized onto socialist revolution, onto not socialist revolutions, but socialist organizations. Even with Freedom Socialist Party getting involved into like protests in the East and the West, and even the international Marxist tendency arming people as well. What we have to realize here is that this is good onto the favors. This is very much good onto the favors. The proletariat, for there to be entirely of a revolution to stay, and for the sake of a revolution for proletarian liberation, there does need to be a vanguard party. Now, the entire idea of the vanguard party is usually misconsumed by anarchists and even fellow Marxists and even fellow communists. So one thing that we do need to understand here is what Lenin and Karl Marx even defined as the vanguard party, and they defined it over and over again as the party of the masses, the party of the workers, party of the proletariat, etc. I think you might get the idea. Essentially, it is the party of the proletariat that is to organize the proletariat and be, well, the vanguarding party of the proletariat to protect the people, to protect the proletariat by allowing it to have freedom of organization, and actually understand to what needs to be done, to essentially discuss and come to some sort of conclusion and vote via cadre onto what needs to be done. This is on how the vanguard party, at least onto the system, is supposed to work. It is the party of the proletariat, by which the proletariat themselves organize within them. This is essentially what is already on to like. This is already onto like what is happening, kind of like with many socialist parties, such as Socialist Party USA, with its own form of democracy, its own form of democratic organizing, even Freedom Socialist Party by going by Lenin's democratic centralism, as well as international Marxist tendency going about onto democratic centralism as well. This is actually and even the Fifth International going by democratic centralism and to independent socialist group, etc. And this is actually betterment for us socialists because there does need to be a vanguard party. We need to essentially join an organization now more than ever. This is our moment in time to essentially come to these protests, find any protests that you can find, and join them, and join upon them, with your fellow comrades, and actually get these protests onto the more of the socialist tendency, like what many social organizations are doing, and especially now more than ever to to join an organization. For example, I've even applied for membership of Socialist Party, and Freedom Socialist Party as well. Um, and I'm still waiting on to like their contact back. But even then, we still need to actually organize ourselves onto like what needs to be done entirely. Hell, I even gone to a protest here and there as well. But hey, it happens. So one thing that we need to understand here is that yes, get involved entirely. Do what you can to essentially keep this movement growing and actually make this movement entirely of a socialist tendency, and get the proletariat educated as well into socialist theory and into socialist thought. So that way we can have our proletarian revolution and an entire proletarian revolution, and for the liberation of the proletariat entirely. Once that is done, especially now more than ever, we need to arm these workers as well. We need to arm these workers because already the United States is already deploying the military upon over protests of these, and they're cracking down on these riots. They're cracking down upon of these protests. That and they're accusing them of violence. They're accusing them of essentially looting, and so many more, and they're accusing them of burning down places just for the sake of getting attention, which as we can see is not the case. So one thing that does need to be heard upon this is that what needs to be done is that we need to find some sort of way to essentially compete against the capitalists, compete against and compete against the ruling class that seeks to destroy us. That being is that we need to arm these people, arm the proletariat, and essentially help them gain control upon to the state government, state apparatus, so that way they can even establish upon to their own worker states, or even upon to like their own little wave to essentially be able to combat against the capitalists, and essentially not or even then not even that, but essentially make these workers being onto the mass movement, by according to a vanguard party, that being the party of the proletariat, to essentially take control of many state apparatus, such as like state governments, state congresses, and a whole bunch of more. So that way we can give onto so that and then you get goods, and then distribute those said goods to the working class. And already then those protesters have already been doing that, thanks to the help of advice from Socialist Party and Freedom Socialist Party as well. So one thing that needs to be clear about what has to be done is to be essentially a vanguard party of the proletariat, run under in some sort of democratic wave by which the proletariat themselves can discuss, debate, and then come to some sort of conclusion or come to some sort of end on said discussion, and then vote onto what needs to be done, and then take upon that action based on the vote of the majority, onto the majority of the vote. And that's the more betterment way is how we can actually organize ourselves as well onto a unity of the left between anarchists and communists to essentially unite upon each other and join upon the party of the proletariat. Or it doesn't even have to be like a specific political party. It can just be some sort of organization. Hell, a militia front, for example. Just some sort of organization where the proletariat themselves can organize and can essentially be a part of themselves and actually organize themselves and upon to their own discussion and their own decision as well, because they are the people that essentially are to be liberated first, and they must have onto the decision on what is to be done, and everyone has an entirety of the equal vote as well, equal cadre. So this is what needs to be done, right? join an organization. I recommend, even a socialist in the continental United States of America, I recommend all of you joining Socialist Party USA, Freedom Socialist Party, um, Freedom Socialist Party, the Fifth International. It's a very good party. Let's see what else. Um, and 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 the FLTI as well. The Fracción Leninista Trotskista Internacional, where they are even trying to set up a branch in the United States, of course. So yeah, and even then, especially with these protests happening all over the world, they are definitely a very great organization to be a part of ourselves with, and also be a part of the Fifth International as well, being the fifth strain onto the international socialist tendency. So, and so even then, when we are to take us as socialists in America, or even socialists in many first world countries, like Britain, or various other countries that have these protests, or even Latin America, we have to understand that we do need to have some sort of party of the proletariat, not to essentially lead the proletariat, but essentially to have the proletariat organize upon themselves through some sort of democracy, some sort of democratic wave and discussion where they can come to some sort of conclusion entirely. This is the revolutionary motive that has to be taken, and it has worked before. We have to learn onto what has happened in Russia, and that what led to essentially the worker state of Russia, to essentially take hold and actually create many good decisions for the entirety of the working class before the bureaucracy set in after the ban on factions. Thus, what we have to also understand from the past of that is that we cannot ban factions, we cannot suppress democracy, and we should not suppress the entirety of the organizing of the proletariat themselves. And thus, we cannot try and say that socialism can be achieved in some sort of national level. The revolution is only completed once capitalism is defeated. Thus, we must make the revolution permanent until capitalism is defeated. This is the only way that we can actually sustain onto the workers' liberation of the proletariat. We cannot have a completion of the revolution in national limits. The revolution is always permanent until capitalism is defeated. We must industrialize and we must centralize entirely of the worker state, and we can do this. But the thing is, we have to always remember that the revolution is permanent until capitalism is defeated. But even that has to assume that these revolutions do indeed have some sort of establish a worker state. So, by this, what needs to be done, what has to be done, is essentially there has to be some sort of party of the proletariat to organize themselves. The proletariat must arm themselves. The proletariat must organize within themselves. And part of the party of the proletariat, there has to be democracy and some sort of centralized democracy, democratic centralism within the functions of the vanguard party. And we have to realize that the vanguard party is not supposed to lead onto the proletariat. Rather, the proletariat themselves, a part of the party, are the ones that lead themselves. Thus, there will be a centralized democracy, but even then, representatives, a part of that centralized democracy, is supposed to be represented by the proletariat. And if the proletariat feels like the people, part of the party, if they feel that those said representatives are not representing them so far, they can vote to essentially take them out of power and take them out as a representative if they truly wanted to. We have to have some form of this faction and the function, and the best parties that we can actually do that upon in the United States, and even socialist international organizations, as we can see upon that, is, I would say, Socialist Party USA, where both anarchists and communists are allowed to organize themselves and actually have some form of democracy within the party, even have a cadre, and there's even debate if these people even function under democratic centralism or not. But even based on that, I'm not going to say they function on democratic centralism, but it's very similar. Freedom Socialist Party, where they do function upon democratic centralism, they do have an equal cadre. Communists and anarchists both organize upon entirely. There's representatives that are supposed to represent the people first, and even onto internationals. We should talk about the Fifth International that also function around democratic centralism, have both anarchists and communists to organize as well, and even then is supposed to actually give onto the liberation of the proletariat internationally as well. And even recognizes that the revolution has to be permanent until capitalism is defeated. And same thing with the Fracción Leninista Trotskista Internacional. Sure, the name itself does say that it's supposed to be that's for Leninists and Trotskyists. They do indeed organize themselves with anarchists from what I know upon them, and they do indeed help out. So but like yeah, like I said, they are mostly made for Leninists and Trotskyists. So if you actually organize yourselves upon the Leninist and Trotskyist tendency of Marxism, or even if you are a Marxist at all, I would definitely check out these people. They mostly operate obviously in Latin American countries and the Middle East as well, North Africa and Southern Africa. But they are indeed quite an organization to check out, especially if you are living in those areas for sure. Anyway, but yes, so this has to be done. We can't look upon this, and we can't just say that, and we can't just essentially let this entire movement, this already massive movement of the proletariat entirely to die out. What we need is essentially to essentially have a vanguard party, a party of the proletariat, to essentially keep this revolution organized until we can overthrow the entirety of the state bureaucracy, arm the workers, arm everything, do what we can to essentially help out upon the proletariat, because if we're not careful, these movements will die out, and they will die out in a violent fashion. We're already seeing it now with the National Guard and the military being deployed upon it, and people being fired with rubber bullets that essentially leave scars upon them, getting shot in the leg over and over again, because just for the sake of doing, even when in peaceful protest, they even do this. That's what led to the violence happening in the first place. So, and now they're going to attack it with even more violence entirely. So what needs to be done is to essentially arm these workers as well. This is the best way we can function it, and this is how we have always, and this is how the entirety of socialists entirely should organize upon it. And so one thing that we have to even recognize is that that these things have to be done, and if it can't be done, then there's no point to even have this revolution in the first place. The revolution will die out. The best way we can actually understand it is upon the writings of Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, James Buchanan, Max Chapman, Joseph Hansen, um, CLR James, and Tony Cliff, and Alan Wood. This is the best way we can actually understand ourselves and upon what needs to be done entirely. So yes, this is now more than ever to essentially read some of these authors and to actually understand what has to be done entirely into our movement. So, and I'll even give links upon it on what I recommend that you should read, if you want to understand this more, or if you just want to go ahead and get involved. Then I'll even give links onto like organizations to join as well, if you so desire. Anyways, yes, socialist links. So I'm gonna conclude the video here. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, hit the like button down below. I'd very much appreciate it. If you're new to my channel, hit the subscribe button. I'd very much appreciate it. And you can press the bell as soon as you subscribe if you want to be notified when I upload. But yeah, thank you for watching. And Socialist Links is out.